Pista began crying out for her mother, and Nish immediately spread her wings and tried to get airborne. Even if the gravity had allowed it, Nish was stopped by several other visitors. "Are you insane? You'll get fried by the electrical fence," someone said. Nish did not care. She kept struggling and flapping her wings. All she could hear was Pista saying "Mummy" over and over again. At that point, a keeper arrived. "Shit!" they exclaimed. Nish noticed the uniform, and her attention switched to them. "Do something! Get her out of there!" she ordered. "We've got a team on the way," they replied, and Nish couldn't help but notice they seemed way out of their depth. Medina prided itself on its safety record, and while that was good, it sadly meant that just about everyone was inexperienced in situations like this. "How long will that take?" demanded Nish. She looked at her daughter, who kept screaming for her, and Nish, and never felt so worried in her life. The keeper reached for their radio and was about to ask before they paused and asked, "Who are you?" Nish was stunned by this level of stupidity, and even though she knew it was counterproductive, she was currently running on emotion, not thought. Nish just stared at them, trying her hardest to burn their eyes out with her gaze. "You're their parent?" asked the keeper. "Did the wings and exoskeleton give it away? I'll get my baby girl out of there!" she screamed. The keeper began to ask, once again, when the rescue party would arrive, when Pista screamed in terror. Nish immediately looked, and she nearly screamed as well. Nish was too terrified though. Emerging from the foliage were a dozen Vetoru. Almost half the pack had arrived. At first the animals did nothing. They just stared at Pista, and she stared right back. The keeper knew what they were doing. They were weighing their options. The Vetoru had never interacted with anyone but their keepers before, and that had always been with thick metal barriers between them. The Vetoru knew what it meant when something was thrown into the paddock. It meant food. This one was moving, and despite never living in the wild, they understood instinctively that prey could fight back, and they had to decide whether the benefit of food outweighed the risk of injury. The keeper knew the answer. He just prayed that the beasts would keep themselves guessing long enough for the team to arrive, and they could trank them all. One of the Vetoru took a step forward, and Pista bust her wings in response. The animal stopped, but did not retreat. The Vetoru looked directly into Pista's eyes before letting out a low chirp. In response, the other pack members fanned out and surrounded the little Tufanda, boxing her in against the moat. Once again, Nish tried to fly over the fence, and once again she was stopped. She struggled as a second keeper arrived and, using all their strength, hurled a chunk of meat into the enclosure, praying that an easier meal would distract them. The Vetoru paused and looked at the meat that had just been presented to them, before turning back to Pista. Their blood was up, and they longed to sink their teeth into something that struggled. Another call went out, and the pack began to close in around her. She made no sudden movements, and a posture indicated Pista was weak and frightened. "Help me, Mummy," Pista croaked. Nish watched on in horror, hoping that this was all just a terrible nightmare, and that she would wake up soon. She knew it was not, however. One of the beasts got ready to lunge as something else burst from the tree line, charging at the nearest Vetoru. The creature had just a moment to react and see what had disturbed them. As its synapse fired, it was knocked to the ground, its skull shattered like an eggshell, its blood and brains oozing into the ground. The rest of the pack immediately reacted with alarm calls, and one of their number, most likely the youngest, mistook this as the signal to attack. It charged at Pista, and the little girl chirped as loud as she could. The Vetoru had covered 3/4 of the distance before a swift kick sent it hurtling to the ground. It died instantly, as his ribcage shattered, and a shower of bone perforated his heart, lungs, and stomach. Now Gabriel stood between the pack and Pista. The group let out a barrage of hisses and screeches, to which Gabriel responded with a scream of rage, the sound amplified by the speakers in his suit. The Vetoru retreated, but not by much. They had no idea what Gabriel was, but they knew it was not prey. He was a rival, and he could not be scared off. Under these circumstances, most animals would have cut their losses and given up. Gabriel had already killed 2 of them, and Pista was not a meal worth dying over. Vetoru were not animals, though. They were not people, but they were more than animals, and they understood the concept of revenge. Their leader again gave out a call, and the rest of the pack regrouped. Gabriel took this moment to inspect his surroundings. There was a tree close by, and he took the opportunity to say, "Kid, we're going to walk to the tree, okay?" Pista did not respond. She was still trembling in fear. Gabriel wasn't even sure if she had realized he was not here to hurt her. "Can you hear me?" he demanded. It was not the most compassionate tone, but he could not afford to be so. Not now. Pista regained control of her neck. She looked up. Yes, she stuttered. "Stand up. Stay behind me. We are going to back up towards that tree." He pointed to the one he meant. "You are not going to run, and you will keep your eyes forward until you touch the trunk." Pista did not reply, and once again, Gabriel adopted a commanding tone. Do you understand? The girl let out a small, squeaking chirp, which Gabriel assumed was a yes, as she did indeed stand up and stood directly behind him. Slowly the pair started to retreat, all the while Gabriel never once took his eyes off the Vetoro. They had reformed their box, and for every step back he and Pista took, they took one forward. After what seemed like an hour of painfully slow retreat, Pista mumbled, "Here." Gabriel knew what she meant and said, "Now, up the tree. Slow and steady now." Pista began to climb the tree, shaking. The added water weight made it difficult, but eventually she made it. She felt safer up in the branches, and she looked down at the aliens. The one that talked was standing just below her, but the others were slowly approaching them. Pista grasped the trunk with all her might, and held her breath. Gabriel had hoped that his mere presence and defiance would deter them long enough for the keepers to intervene. Sadly, it seemed Gabriel had a fight on his hands, something he was not relishing. He had not been in a fight since he turned 14. What made it all the more difficult was that he had injured his leg while jumping over the fence. It was not broken, but he was suffering a mild sprain. With the Vetoro being so nimble, it might prove problematic. Gabriel took comfort that his suit would be impenetrable to the beast's fangs and claws, though he was not looking forward to being enveloped in a mass of angry dinosaurs. However, he had no more time to plan as the call was given and 5 Vetoro charged. They covered the distance with blinding speed and leapt on top of Gabriel. They bit and clawed at his suit, and though each Vetoro did not weigh much, together they began to drag him down. Nish watched all of this with awe. While she breathed easier now that Pista was in the tree, and a thank to any god that was listening that she had not been forced to watch her daughter being torn to shreds, she was also terrified as the Vetoro was now mauling Pista's saviour. It had not taken long for Nish to realise who it was, and while the human was undoubtedly the best equipped to survive the encounter, Nish was beginning to doubt it would be enough. One of the Vetoro fell away from the mob, or rather tried to. The human was holding onto its arm with a vice grip. The human's hand made a violent twisting motion, and the animal let out a howl of agony. As the Vetoro screamed, the human let go, and the beast ran away, a broken arm limply flaying behind. Despite the situation, Nish could help but be amazed at how the human had sat it with such contemptuous ease. The pack leader also noticed this and raised his head into the air, letting out a deep bellowing call, utterly unlike any noise they had made before. Gabriel did hear it, but paid it no mind. Instead, he took advantage of the drop in weight, and flung several of the Vettori off him. With his arms now freed, he grasped the tail of the Vetoro busy clawing at his back, and held it over his head, down onto a log, and impaled it on a broken branch. The creature let out a gurgling croak as the life poured out of it. Gabriel had no time to savour his victory, because the Vetoro immediately attacked him with a renewed fury. He had killed 3 of them now, and they were determined that he should die. Their leader was still holding back, coordinating the attack, as it chirped, cawed and hissed. The other Vetoro would use feints, pincer movements, and a full frontal assault. The beast was undoubtedly clever, but none of this tactical genius could get around that they could not get through his suit. Unbeknownst to anyone but Gabriel, the animal succeeded in one degree. He was already suffering some mild bruising from their bites. Nothing serious, but the longer the fight went on, the more time they had to realise that they could, in theory, choke him to death. That did give him an idea, however. As one of the creatures latched onto his arm, he, in turn, grasped it around the neck and snapped it like a chicken bone. Once again, their leader let out that deep bellowing call, and at it, the rest of the pack backed off. Gabriel did not let down his guard and assumed it was merely a pause before a renewed assault. Where the hell were the other keepers? He must have been down here for at least a quarter of an hour. You would have thought they would have gotten here by now. The two groups stared at one another. Gabriel was so focused on the task that he had no idea how long it had gone on for. They were still surrounding him, but it was not the rigid, organised box they had used before. He would swear they were. His train of thought was broken when the entire pack, including the one with the broken arm whom the others were assisting in moving, vanished back into the brush. Now everything was quiet. The human stood alone in the clearing. Pista was still safe in the tree. Nish let out a sigh of relief and nearly collapsed to her knees. All around came cheers. It had been quite the spectacle, all the more breathtaking as no one had died or even been injured. Nish finally pulled her eyes away and looked at the keeper, and she tried to ask when they would get the 2 of them out. It hit her like a truck. The 2 keepers were not cheering, hooting or making any noise whatsoever. Feeling the horror rise once more made all the more unbearable because she had believed it was over, Nish turned her head back just in time to hear her daughter scream and the human being knocked to the ground by a towering behemoth.